78,000 years ago, someone placed a child into the ground on the coast of Kenya. The child was 2, maybe 3 years old. Whoever buried this kid curled the tiny body on its side, tucked the knees up against the chest, and rested the head on something soft, probably bundled plant material, like a pillow. There is evidence the body was wrapped tightly in some kind of shroud before it was lowered into the pit. This was not a body tossed aside. This was a goodbye. Archaeologists found the remains inside a cave called Panga ya Saidi and gave the child a name, Mtoto, the Swahili word for child. And for years after its discovery, researchers called it the oldest known deliberate human burial anywhere on the continent of Africa. Think about that for a second. Nearly 80,000 years before the pyramids, before writing, before agriculture, before anything we would recognize as civilization, a group of humans stopped what they were doing, dug a hole in the earth, and carefully laid a dead child to rest. But Mtoto is not even close to the oldest evidence we have of humans doing something with their dead. That trail goes back much, much further. And the deeper you follow it, the stranger it gets. Because the story of how ancient humans treated death is not a straight line from simple to complex. It is full of reversals, surprises, and practices so bizarre they will change how you think about the people who came before us. The oldest suspected burials on Earth did not come from our species at all. They came from Neanderthals. And the most famous of those burials happened inside a cave in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, a place called Shanidar. In the 1950s, an archaeologist named Ralph Selecki began excavating Shanidar Cave and eventually pulled 10 Neanderthal skeletons out of the ground, men, women, and children, some dating back roughly 60,000 years. A few of those individuals appeared to have died in rockfalls inside the cave, but others looked like they had been placed there on purpose. And one of them, a male labeled Shanidar 4, had something unexpected around his body. Pollen, clumps of it, from several species of wildflower. Selecki believed those flowers had been placed with the dead Neanderthal intentionally, and he published a book in 1971 called Shanidar, the First Flower People. The idea electrified the public. Neanderthals, who for a century had been portrayed as dim-witted brutes, were suddenly reimagined as beings capable of mourning, of ritual, of laying flowers on a grave. It was beautiful. It was also, possibly, wrong. Decades later, researchers returned to Shanidar Cave and proposed a far less romantic explanation. The pollen clumps might not have come from flowers placed by grieving Neanderthals at all. They might have been deposited by bees. Solitary bees still burrow into the cave floor today, and bees carry pollen in clumps that look almost identical to what Selecki found. So the flower burial might have been a coincidence of insect behavior and hopeful interpretation. But here is where the story takes another turn. When the new team reopened the old excavation trench, they found a brand new Neanderthal skeleton, one they called Shanidar Z, and the evidence around it pointed strongly toward intentional burial. The body was lying in what appeared to be a deliberately dug channel in the cave floor. The bones were articulated, meaning the skeleton was still in anatomical order, which only happens when a body is covered and protected from scavengers shortly after death. And there was more. The new team found that the Shanidar Neanderthals had returned to the same spot in the cave to deposit their dead, not once, but multiple times. There is a large boulder near the burial cluster, and the researchers believe the Neanderthals may have used it as a marker, a landmark that said, "This is where we put our dead." That detail matters more than the flowers ever did. It suggests that Neanderthals had what archaeologists call topographic memory. They knew their landscape, they remembered specific locations and assigned meaning to them. If that is what happened at Shanidar, it means Neanderthals were doing something remarkable. They were creating a place for the dead, not just disposing of bodies, but returning to a chosen spot with purpose. And if that sounds like the beginning of a cemetery, that is because it might be exactly that. And the grave goods tell us even more. At Kafser Cave in Israel, one of the oldest confirmed burial sites for our own species, dating back roughly 100,000 years, archaeologists found the remains of 15 early Homo sapiens. Several of those burials contained objects that had no practical reason to be in a grave. Red ochre, the iron-rich pigment, the color of dried blood, was scattered around the bodies. In one burial, an adolescent around 12 or 13 years old had been placed in a carved niche in the rock with a large set of fallow deer antlers laid across the chest and hands. The antlers were not food scraps. They were not tools. They had been severed from the deer and placed there with intention. At nearby Skull Cave on Mount Carmel, another burial from roughly the same period contained a man holding the jawbone of a wild boar cradled in his arms. These are some of the oldest known grave goods in the world. Objects placed with the dead for reasons we can only guess at. Protection maybe, an offering to something unseen, or simply the need to send someone off with something meaningful. Whatever the reason, it means that 100,000 years ago, people were already spending time and effort selecting objects and placing them beside bodies they had deliberately buried. That is not instinct. That is culture. But the Neanderthals are not the only ancient relatives who may have buried their dead. In 2013, deep inside a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, researchers found the remains of a previously unknown species they named Homo naledi. The bones were scattered across the cave floor in a chamber so difficult to reach that the excavation team had to recruit small-bodied scientists who could squeeze through a gap barely 7.5 inches wide. What they found inside was astonishing. At least 15 individuals, adults and children, all belonging to this one species. And here is the part that made headlines around the world. Homo naledi had a brain roughly 1/3 the size of ours. The researchers who studied the site proposed that these small-brained relatives had deliberately carried their dead deep into the cave system and placed them there. That claim is still debated. Some experts argue that the evidence for intentional burial is not strong enough, but the sheer number of individuals found in such a remote and dangerous part of the cave is hard to explain any other way. If the team is right, it means the impulse to do something deliberate with the dead goes back at least 250,000 years, and it might not require a big brain to feel it. So ancient humans and their relatives were burying the dead long before anyone built a temple or planted a crop. But burial was only one option, and it was not always the most popular one. Some of the most fascinating death practices from the ancient world involved doing things to the body that would strike most people today as shocking. Take the Chinchorro. They lived along the Pacific coast of what is now northern Chile, at the edge of the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth. The Chinchorro were fishers and hunters, not city builders. They had no writing, no pottery, no monumental architecture. And yet, around 7,000 years ago, they started mummifying their dead. That is roughly 2,000 years before the ancient Egyptians. The oldest intentionally mummified remains ever found belong to the Chinchorro, and the process they used was extraordinary. In the earliest phase, they would take a body completely apart. They removed the skin, stripped the muscles, pulled out the organs, and in some cases extracted the brain. Then they rebuilt the person from the inside out, reinforcing the skeleton with sticks and reeds, stuffing the body cavity, and putting the skin back on like a suit. They covered the reassembled body with a layer of black manganese paste, and sometimes gave it a wig and a clay mask molded over the face. The result was not a preserved corpse in the Egyptian sense. It was something closer to a sculpture of a person, built on top of their own bones. And unlike the Egyptians, who reserved mummification for pharaohs and the wealthy, the Chinchorro mummified everyone: men, women, children, even stillborn babies. In fact, some researchers believe mummification in Chinchorro culture actually started with infants and fetuses, possibly because infant mortality was high in a region with dangerously high levels of naturally occurring arsenic in the water. Losing a baby that young, that often, may have been the thing that drove an entire culture to develop one of the most elaborate death rituals in human history. Over roughly 4,000 years, the Chinchorro mummification technique evolved through distinct phases. The earliest black mummies involved full disassembly and reconstruction. Later came the red mummies, which were created by making small incisions, removing the organs, and drying the body cavity from within, then painting the skin with red ochre. Both styles were stuffed with sticks and reeds to fill out the form, given wigs of human hair, and fitted with clay masks over the faces. In 2021, UNESCO recognized these sites as a World Heritage Property, calling them among the most exceptional examples of the artificial mummification tradition in the world. The Egyptians get most of the attention when it comes to mummification, and for good reason. They turned it into an art form that lasted for more than 3,000 years. By the time of the Old Kingdom, around 2600 BCE, mummification had become standard practice, and over the centuries, the embalmers refined it into one of the most technically precise preservation methods the world has ever seen. The full Egyptian process took about 70 days. Embalmers washed the body with water from the Nile and with palm wine. They used a long, hooked instrument to pull the brain out through the nose, because the Egyptians did not consider the brain important and simply threw it away. They made an incision in the left side of the abdomen and carefully removed the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, placing each organ in its own canopic jar. They left the heart in the chest because they believed the heart was the seat of intelligence and emotion, the organ that would be weighed against the feather of truth in the afterlife. Then they packed the body cavity with natron, a natural salt, and left it to dry for 40 days. After the drying period, they stuffed the body with linen and sawdust to restore its shape, rubbed it with oils and resins, and wrapped it in hundreds of yards of linen strips. Priests recited prayers and spells throughout the process, and the final step was the opening of the mouth ceremony, where a priest touched the mummy's face with ritual tools to symbolically restore its ability to eat, drink, breathe, and speak in the afterlife. Without that ceremony, the Egyptians believed the mummy was spiritually inert, a preserved body with no way to cross into the next world. All of this was driven by a single belief: the soul needed a body. The Egyptians believed that after death, the soul split into multiple parts, including the ka, which was the life force, and the ba, which was the personality. The ba would leave the body during the day and travel through the afterlife, but it needed to return to the physical body each night. If the body decayed, the ba could not find its way home, and the person would be lost forever. That terror, the idea of permanent spiritual death, was the engine behind the entire mummification industry. And it was an industry. There were different tiers of service depending on how much a family could afford, from the full royal treatment down to a basic version that involved little more than a rinse and some natron. The Greek historian Herodotus described the tiered pricing system in the 5th century BCE, and he noted that even the cheapest option was taken seriously, because Egyptians believed a person who was improperly prepared for burial could return from the afterlife to torment their living relatives. But not every ancient culture wanted to preserve the body. Some wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and few methods were as dramatic as the sky burial. In Zoroastrian tradition, one of the oldest religious systems in the world, dating back roughly 3,000 years to the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, a dead body was considered deeply unclean. The Zoroastrians believed that a corpse demon entered the body immediately after death and contaminated everything it touched. Earth was sacred. Fire was sacred. Water was sacred. You could not bury the body because that would pollute the earth. You could not cremate it because that would defile fire. So the Zoroastrians developed a solution. They built tall, circular stone structures called dakhmas, known in English as Towers of Silence. Mourners carried the body to the top of the tower and laid it out on a flat stone platform, arranged in 3 concentric rings. Men were placed in the outer ring, women in the middle, children in the innermost circle, and then they left. Vultures did the rest. The birds would strip the flesh from the bones in a matter of hours, and afterward, the bleached skeleton would be pushed into a central pit, an ossuary, where the bones slowly dissolved. The entire purpose was to dispose of the body without allowing it to contaminate any element of the natural world. Tibetan Buddhists practiced something similar, though the reasoning was completely different. In the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition, the body after death is an empty vessel. The spirit has already moved on, preparing for rebirth into another form. There is no spiritual need to preserve the body, so leaving it for the vultures is considered an act of generosity, a final gift of sustenance from a life that no longer needs its shell. Tibetan sky burials still take place today at certain monastery sites, and the process often involves a ritual specialist who prepares the body by breaking bones and cutting flesh to make it easier for the birds to consume. To Western eyes, this can look disturbing. To practitioners, it is a profound act of compassion. And then there were cultures that took a completely different approach, one that makes sky burials look mild by comparison. They ate their dead. The practice is called endo-cannibalism, and it was more common in the ancient world than most people realize. The Fore people of Papua New Guinea practiced it well into the 20th century. When someone in the community died, their relatives would consume the body as part of a funerary ritual. Women and children typically ate the brain and internal organs, while the flesh was distributed among other members of the group. This was not about hunger, it was an act of love. The Fore believed that consuming the dead person kept their spirit close and prevented it from wandering the earth in anguish. The practice only stopped in the 1950s and 60s when researchers discovered it was spreading a fatal brain disease called Kuru, a prion disease similar to mad cow disease that was transmitted through the consumption of infected brain tissue. The epidemic killed thousands of Fore people before the practice was finally abandoned under pressure from Australian colonial authorities. But funerary cannibalism goes back much further than the Fore. In Europe, the Magdalenian people, hunter-gatherers who lived roughly 17,000 to 12,000 years ago, left behind evidence that they consumed their dead and then turned the remains into objects. At Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, archaeologists found human bones covered in bite marks and cut marks consistent with defleshing and marrow extraction. Long bones had been cracked open for marrow, the same way you would crack open an animal bone after a hunt. And the skulls had been carefully shaped into cups, with the facial bones and base removed, the edges smoothed and rounded, and the cranium hollowed out to form a vessel you could drink from. Other bones had fine engravings carved into them, precise zigzag lines that took time and skill to produce. Researchers at the Natural History Museum in London concluded that the bodies were eaten, but the skulls and bones were then transformed into ritual objects, suggesting the practice had layers of meaning beyond simple consumption. The dead were not just food, they were raw material for something sacred. This obsession with skulls, specifically, runs deep through human history. And nowhere is it more vivid than at one of the most mysterious archaeological sites on the planet. At Gobekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, one of the oldest known ritual sites in the world, dating back roughly 11,000 years, massive T-shaped stone pillars stand in circles on a hilltop. The pillars are carved with images of snakes, vultures, foxes, and scorpions. Some bear the image of headless human figures. No one lived there permanently. There are no houses, no storage rooms, no signs of daily life. The site appears to have been built entirely for ritual purposes by hunter-gatherers who had not yet adopted farming. And among the animal bones and stone carvings, archaeologists found fragments of 3 human skulls that had been deliberately carved and modified after death. Deep grooves had been cut into the bone along the top of the head, and one skull had a hole drilled through it, possibly so it could be hung from a cord. The site is covered in stone carvings of animals and headless human figures, and researchers believe the people of Gobekli Tepe may have practiced a form of skull cult, displaying the heads of ancestors or enemies, or both, as part of whatever rituals took place among those massive stone pillars. We do not know which it was. The skulls might have been trophies of war. They might have been sacred objects of ancestor worship. Either way, someone sat down with a flint tool and spent considerable time and effort carving the skull of a dead person with purpose and intent. And the skulls at Gobekli Tepe were not an isolated case. Across the ancient Near East, in the period following the invention of agriculture, skull removal and modification became surprisingly common. At sites like Jericho, now in the West Bank, archaeologists found skulls that had been separated from their bodies, plastered over with clay to reconstruct facial features, and fitted with seashells in the eye sockets. These plastered skulls were not hidden in graves. They were kept in homes. Families lived with the faces of their dead relatives molded in clay, staring at them from shelves or corners of the room. For years, possibly generations. That is not disposal. That is companionship. That is the refusal to let go of someone's face. If you pull back and look at all of these practices together, a pattern starts to emerge. It is not a pattern of increasing sophistication. The oldest evidence does not start simple and get steadily more complex. The Chinchorro were mummifying bodies 2,000 years before the Egyptians, and their society was far less complex. The Neanderthals may have been choosing burial spots and returning to them 60,000 years ago, and their brains were shaped differently from ours. Some cultures preserved the body forever. Others destroyed it within hours. Some kept the skull on a shelf. Others ground the bones into powder and drank them. What connects all of these practices is not the method. It is the fact that death demanded a response. Preservation, destruction, display, consumption, reconstruction. Every method is different, and none of them are random. Each one was embedded in a web of beliefs about what a person is and what happens when that person stops breathing. Each one was passed down, taught, practiced, refined. Death was never a problem people solved once and moved on from. It was a problem every generation had to answer again. No other animal does this. Other species grieve. Elephants linger around the bodies of dead family members. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days. Crows hold what look like funerals, gathering silently around a fallen member of their group. But none of them dig a grave. None of them wrap a body in a shroud and rest the head on a pillow. None of them remove the skull of the dead, plaster it with clay, and keep it in their home. That behavior, that need to act, to transform the body, to mark the event with ritual and intention, appears to be uniquely human, or at least uniquely hominin. It might be one of the oldest things about us. What is remarkable about the archaeological record is not that ancient humans buried their dead. It is the sheer variety of responses they invented. A community in the Atacama Desert reassembled skeletons with sticks and paste. A Neanderthal clan in Iraq returned to the same spot in a cave again and again. An Egyptian embalmer pulled a brain through a nostril with a hook. A Zoroastrian mourner carried a body up a stone tower and left it for the vultures. A Magdalenian craftsman carved the skull of a relative into a drinking cup. A Tibetan Buddhist specialist broke bones on a mountain platform as an offering to the birds. Every one of these acts was a way of answering the same impossible question. Someone has died. What do we do now? And the answers tell us more about the living than the dead. The Egyptians built an entire economy around the belief that the body was the soul's permanent address. The Zoroastrians built towers to keep the dead from contaminating the sacred earth. The Chinchorro rebuilt people from the inside out, as if to say, "You are not gone, you are still here, we can still see your face." Each practice is a mirror. It reflects what a culture fears most about death and what it hopes for beyond it. The child buried in Panga, Saidi 78,000 years ago cannot tell us what those early humans believed. The bones are silent on the question of whether they imagined an afterlife or feared a spirit wandering without rest. But the position of the body tells us something. The knees tucked to the chest. The head rested on something soft, the careful wrapping. Someone did that. Someone kneeled in the dirt of a cave on the Kenyan coast and arranged a dead child as if putting it to sleep. They did not have to do that. They could have left the body for the animals or abandoned it in the bush. But they did not. They chose to act. And 78,000 years later, we are still choosing to act. The methods have changed. Most people in the modern world are embalmed, cremated, or buried in a casket. But new practices keep appearing. Alkaline hydrolysis, sometimes called water cremation, dissolves the body in a pressurized chamber. Human composting, legalized in a growing number of places, turns a body into soil. Some companies offer to compress cremated remains into synthetic diamonds. Others will launch ashes into orbit. The impulse has not gone away. It has simply found new forms. And every one of those forms is still answering the same question that a group of humans asked in a cave on the coast of Africa before the last ice age. What the archaeological record makes clear is that there has never been a single right way to handle the dead. Every culture across every continent found its own answer, and many of those answers look completely alien to each other. A Chinchorro mummy and an Egyptian mummy are both preserved bodies, but they were made for different reasons, by different people, using different techniques, in different hemispheres of the planet, separated by thousands of years. What they share is the conviction that death is not something you just let happen, it is something you do something about. And that conviction might be one of the earliest and most enduring features of being human. The evidence keeps pushing the timeline further back. Homo Naledi in South Africa, 250,000 years ago. Possible early burial evidence at sites in Israel going back over 100,000 years. Modified skulls at Gobekli Tepe, 11,000 years ago. Mummies on the Chilean coast, 7,000 years ago. The Egyptian process refined over 3 millennia. Sky burials documented in the written record going back 2,500 years. Every generation discovers that the story is older than the last generation thought. And the deeper we dig, the more it looks like the need to honor the dead, to mark the transition, to refuse to treat a person like refuse, is woven into the foundation of what it means to be us. That child in Kenya, Mtoto, was not the first person to be buried with care, but the tenderness of that burial, the tucked legs, the pillow, the shroud, still hits hard after 78,000 years, because you recognize it. You know what that gesture means. Someone loved this child, and when the child died, they did the most human thing imaginable. They did not look away, they did not walk away, they got on their knees and they built a bed in the earth. If this video changed how you think about the people who came before us, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which ancient death practice surprised you the most. We cover stories like this every week, and you will not want to miss what is coming next.